I'm Matt Kennedy. I'm the gallery director at La Luz de Jesus Gallery. Worked in the entertainment business for a very long time. I used to do film licensing, written a couple books on art and comic book art and that type of thing. If you go back a couple of generations, not that far, I guess we're same family as Rose Kennedy, that whole clan. President, former senator, the whole nine yards. About a year and a half after I graduated high school, I crashed my car in the snow and decided that was the clock, the countdown to move to California. And my best friend since kindergarten and I got into a car about maybe within the end of the year and just drove to California. I think at any point, at some point at least, in almost anybody's life, you have faith and then lose faith in the system, and it can be any number of criteria. And for me, I felt that a lot of politicians that I thought were going to be in office and were going to change things just very quickly became disappointments. So I remember I believe it was maybe 10th grade, that one of the tests that they gave in Massachusetts was the NEDT, and it was sort of a predecessor of the PSATs and the SATs, and it was sort of a career placement test. And all of my scoring led towards politics. And I laughed about it, I thought it was funny, and I think in high school at that point I thought maybe I'll become a lawyer. And as I graduated and became interested in other things, I just realized that wasn't going to be my path. And when I moved to California, I'd come here to be a musician and didn't do that, but I wound up I did do it for a little while, and became disenfranchised with music. Had started working at an art gallery, and that became a catalyst for a lot of other things, acting being one of them, and I did a lot of commercials and that type of stuff. But I wound up running a company and licensing movies, and in that time was the election, I guess, of our lifetime, of people that are my age, which is, the 2008 election. Really became a catalyst for renewing my interest in politics, but it made me feel as though there's possibility that I think that on name recognition alone, that I would have a chance in the right district. So one of the people that I knew had a brother who was going to run for the governorship of New Jersey. And he had gotten vetted by a company that does this professionally. And through him, I got in touch with somebody locally in California that did the same type of service. And so I sat down, and they asked me a bunch of questions, over the course of about 4.5 hours. And I learned the following things. And I think it speaks to why a lot of people don't run for office who might otherwise be qualified. And it's the criteria that we don't think of. Number one, I'm 5'5". I could run, it just becomes more expensive. And so the other criteria, there were a few things. There was that it'd be a better idea if I were to get my teeth a little bit straighter than they are, that people with a C-shaped teeth have a better chance of attaining public office than people with a U shape. And it's a wider, like a wall of teeth type of thing. And the other big thing was whether or not you are embarrassable. That you can have all kinds of skeletons in your closet, you just have to be able to hit them head on. So you cannot walk into a situation where someone can surprise you with something which causes, an incontrollable response, a blush, a flustering, something that you cannot speak to. And so career politicians have been just coached and cajoled into being able to give automatic responses to any question. And sometimes it's as easy as being able to say something, even if it's not an answer to the question that's asked, in order to get comfortable, to activate your brain into finally formulating an answer to what's being addressed. And some of the questions were kind of amazing. It was like they just ask you, they hit you with embarrassing questions like, when was the last time you masturbated? It was like, when's the last time you did drugs? Yeah, and it's kind of like, you just have to be able to roll off an answer without reacting to it. And I realized, which was nice to know, and maybe a little startling, is that I was pretty much unembarrassable, that I kind of stand by what I've done in my life. I account for things that I did that I don't think were smart, and I wouldn't do them again, but I can't still feel that embarrassment. I wouldn't have gotten past it. And so as a kid who, growing up in the 80s, had experimented with various substances, it was like, is this going to be a problem? And I was like, I don't think it's a problem, and especially after George W. Bush got elected, people knowing he had done cocaine. I think there's people like that everywhere. And I'm sure there are politicians that there are photographs of them peeing in their briefcase at a college party. And maybe a firm got paid to make sure those pictures don't make it out. But that's not unelectable. And there's so few things now that are unelectable when you look at people who are running for office now. I mean, you look at someone like Donald Trump, and it's like, I would think that a line in the book that his ex-wife wrote, where it talks about him raping her as a married couple, that would make him completely unelectable. And maybe they're waiting to see if he makes it through the process to hit him with something that heavy a week before the election, where it's going to really sting, like the calculated attacks on Michael Dukakis during the George H.W. Bush campaign.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
And they knew about it. It wasn't a secret. They just waited until it was going to have the maximum effect to turn the tide of the election. And the science to what that time and distance is, again, think tanks dedicated to that stuff. So, I'm somebody who, at this point in my life, is hoping that somebody like Bernie Sanders can get elected. But I'm also pragmatic, and I know that he will disappoint me. Any politician is going to disappoint me if I put a whole lot of faith in the promises that they make in an election cycle. Obama absolutely disappointed me, but what was the alternative? Now, some of the other criteria that was discussed was, what party do you want to run for? And I didn't want to unseat a qualified Democrat. So I felt that I'd rather run for a seat that was going to go vacant from somebody who was going to run the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party picks people to run. So I would not be at the top of that list because I'm not a rising star in the Democratic Party. So it'd be wiser to run as a Republican, being really more of a Democrat, with the name recognition, the last name Kennedy, somewhere closer to Orange County, where these elections tend to go red. And so while everybody thinks of California as a blue state, when you really break down by county, there's way more red counties in California than there are blue. And it's really just the greater Los Angeles area and San Francisco, and everything else is red state. So when people look on a ballot, they see a familiar name. It's something like 70% of people who vote and actually cast a vote don't really know much about the politicians. They're really relying upon television ads, mailers, radio spots, billboards, and stuff that they see incidentally that they don't look for that finds them. And then in lieu of that, they forget it all. They go into a box, they look on a piece of paper, and they say, oh, I know that name, they'll probably do a good job. Most demographics, most nationalities, the name Kennedy is a name that people recognize. There are several different, I guess you'd call them PR firms, that will decide if they want to handle you. I mean, a lot of PR firms will decide on their clients because they want a success ratio and they want to be able to use it moving forward, but they also want to put a dollar amount on what it's going to cost them to do and how beneficial it is. So a lot of PR firms that will specialize in politicians will charge a lot of money to bring somebody knowing they have a lot of money into a public office. There's other firms that have an ideology that they want to push, an ideology which works with the other clients they have. And so it's easy for them to say, well, you seem like you're friendly to construction. We actually represent these construction firms. We see a mutual interest here. You guys need to talk. And we think you'd be easy to get elected. So if you let us take care of your campaign, it costs X amount of money. Now, the numbers that were thrown at me, and I looked at the smallest amount of money you could spend for the greatest amount of power. And in Los Angeles, that's running any type of educational system, that it's pretty easy to get on the educational board, and elections can cost as little as $10,000 and as much as $100,000, depending upon what you want your position to be. City council is also relatively inexpensive, even in a city as large as LA, and the budget you get to handle. And that's how you equate power, that if you're handling a lot of money, you get to use that moving up the ladder. And so companies that want favors from politicians will habitually look at, okay, who controls the funds? Who controls the funds in our industry? Who should we back? What can we get for what we put into a campaign? And you're seeing this backlash against big money in campaigns on one side, on the Democratic side, and a hands-off policy on the Republican side, because it is, in certain areas of the country, inherently more difficult to get elected as a Republican than as a Democrat. And so they need their money not from rank and file voters where it's a popularity contest, but from big-pocketed corporations. Since you have to run in Congress every 2 years, your first day in office, you sit down and you make phone calls to donors. And your assistant is going to come in, no matter what you're doing, and if you're in a meeting, if you're in Congress, if you're in Washington, pull you out of a possible vote so that you have to go off to a side room because it can't be in the Capitol. It's a building close by where you sit in a cubicle and you make phone calls for a certain amount of money until you hit a certain dollar amount. And it's broken down by year, month, week, day, hour, how much money you have to be raising. So if you're only talking to people that are giving you big donations towards your campaign, then you're really automatically disconnected from the people that you're representing in your district. And so that's a problem. And so I became disenfranchised with the idea of going into that type of political life, that you can have the best intentions in the world, and no matter what party you're with, and you can try and change things, if you have to be thinking about re-election from day one, and you have to be raising money, how much can you get done? Or do you decide, I just want to be a one-term congressman, and I want to get one issue to the table? And so I thought it would be neat if I picked as my issue, you got to put your time in, you got to get called on, you raise your hand or whatever, you get picked, get your resolution. Mine would be that, I'm not sure how many people know this, but if you're ever elected to Congress, even if you are not re-elected, you get a stipend for the rest of your life. Yeah, we pay politicians who don't get reelected. So I'd like to pass a resolution to get that eliminated, knowing, of course, that it would never pass and that I would still benefit from that very same issue, but I'd be seen as the good guy. And then as a former congressman, you have a much better career path as, somebody who's working for, a K Street firm or some type of lobbying, and then I could pick my issue and I could lobby on behalf of that, and I'd be set for life with a salary that afforded a congressman. And I could at least look myself in the mirror every day thinking that I got elected to do better. I didn't sit in a cubicle and make phone calls all day. I really tried to get things done. But then when you leave that position, any good that you've established can be immediately dismantled if you're a one-term person. Above and beyond height, it's good to be wealthy because that just means you have access to other wealthy people. It makes donations an easier thing. The air of success is a good thing to people when they see it, on the election ballot. But like I said, most people don't even know these things. When they're looking at the ballot, it's like with fresh eyes, and it's eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But as far as a marketable campaign, they also look for military service. Any type of military service is good as long as you don't get a dishonorable discharge, and even that can be spun depending upon the circumstances. Degree from the right college in the right degree area, all these things are good. But you see people with degrees from Oral Roberts University and just like really worthless pieces of paper, in the grand scheme of things. And I'm not belittling people's religious beliefs, but what is that worth, to John and Susie Q. Citizen from their politicians? It's why you see people who get really nice placements in committees. And freshman congressmen almost never get appointed to a decent committee, so you really have to stay in a couple of terms to get that appointment, and then having a seat on the right committee is something you want to hold for a while, which raises your value as a lobbyist, and just in a post-politics capacity. Now, someone like me who comes out of entertainment used to be seen as a bad thing. Now it's not such a bad thing. And certainly Al Franken, is a politician and possibly being selected for vice presidential candidate. And we'll see how that goes. But, in a way, it brings me back to National Lampoon. and kind of the magazines I grew up on in the 70s and 80s, where these people were politically aware, and the comedy was very biting. It was satirical in the way that I think that good comedy is, and that's gone. So not only is there a disinterest on obviously the part of the casual voter and a disinterest among qualified people to become politicians, but even among the news media, and you look at the death of the newspaper and significant dwindling in circulation of news periodicals, people finding news online that's completely unverified, the 24-hour news cycle, cable television, the need for news stories constantly, and the need to take a small story and stretch it as long as possible, that this desensitizes the average American voter to caring about real issues. These all lead, of course, to a never-ending campaign. And as I said, day one, how many phone calls do you make? Day two, how much money do you have to raise? Week 14, where are you in your re-election cycle? So the best place for people to actually impact government is always on a local level. City council is a great place to do that because you vote on everything from, are we putting a stop sign at the corner of such and such a street, to are we open for business on Sundays? Are we collecting tax revenue through parking tickets and how much? Are we going to put up meters instead of having free parking in an area? It's easy to overlook the fact that you can do something that you love for a living. You can get paid to do something that you love. But once that happens, getting paid for something that you love becomes a job. And so you have to balance your love for that thing with the work aspect of it. And I think that people can get mired in this idea that, well, I do what I love. So you become an artist, you become a painter, maybe you start selling paintings. And then you think that you can continue doing it just because you love it, but now it's a source of income. It's not a fun thing that you do, so you have to approach it a little bit more professionally. And as someone who runs an art gallery, I see that a lot, that people don't realize what they're in for. And for me, when I became sort of reignited to think about politics, it was out of that altruistic, I can change things, I could be a better politician. And I think when I realized that that's almost not possible, that it changed my love for the thing into knowing that, okay, maybe this isn't something that I can do. And then when I got married again, I realized that my wife was not going to be somebody who could handle a campaign. That the type of intrusion that happens when you run for office means that it's not just your life that's transparent, it's everybody's life that's transparent. I mean, she hasn't killed anybody, and she's got no big secrets to hide, but she's not a very public person. The fish tank aspect of being a politician is not on par with a celebrity. It's worse. What does Matt Damon's wife do? Where did Tobey Maguire's wife graduate college? What does she do for a job? You don't know. Politicians, their spouses are targeted because there are special interests that want to use anything and everything to unseat them. And so they investigate their kids, their cousins, their brothers and sisters, their parents. I mean, how many people know that much information about even the most famous celebrities? And then as far as like hate and feedback, unless you are like a Twitter celebrity or a very young single artist who's just gotten married, that person's spouse does not receive the type of negative aimed publicity, feedback, attack that, any other industry faces. The industry that's built around protecting politicians from other politicians and news agencies is a very lucrative business. It's, K Street is filled with lobbyists who work not just to push products, but to protect politicians. And then there's PR firms everywhere. And there's PR firms in Los Angeles that handle politics and musicians and products and industry. And, you look at businesses in entertainment, you look at a place like CAA or William Morris, they started representing artists too, because they already represent the clients that want to hire artists. So they can get money on both ends of that. It's like in Illinois, if you represent a house for sale, you can represent both the buyer and the seller. Not too many states where you can do that. Honestly, if you are electable and you can sustain that type of level of politic, then you're pretty much all the same. There is not a lot of difference between Democrats and Republicans. The Clintons, when Bill Clinton was president, he was not so Democratic. He was almost like a really liberal Republican in his policies. He was a war president, and of course they didn't go after him on illegally bombing Bosnia and Serbia. Why? Because it's not what the Republicans did. They don't attack Democrats for being strong. They want to attack them on weakness. So what becomes the subject of his presidency? A blowjob. And what did he do? He lied about it. It's not the deed, it's the lie. And so, like I say, if you're unembarrassable and you know what's out there, then you can make it through the system. But it's not just you. I would say that for me, I'm not motivated to run for office because I wouldn't want to put my wife through an election cycle. I had seen a documentary on, of all people, Mitt Romney. And I saw it after the election. And then when he said he wasn't going to run, this time, I thought, well, that makes him electable. That he was considering the feelings of his wife, who has, I believe, multiple sclerosis. But she has a condition which makes a campaign difficult for her. And he didn't want to put her through another campaign. Like, well, that makes him worthy of the office. And I mean, that's where we're at. It's like the people who would run for office, maybe that automatically disqualifies them for being people you should put your faith in. I mean, but then I look at like Ted Cruz, and I'm just like, anybody can get elected president if that guy can get elected president. As John or Susie Q citizen, I don't care if you vote Democrat or Republican, why would you want your politicians to be able to take money from corporations? That immediately lessens your voice in their constituency. If a corporation can vote with money, then they outrank your vote. This country, it's supposed to be, one vote, one voice, that people choose the politicians. Of course, that's not true. We have an electoral college, and that's why people are like, my vote doesn't count, and sometimes it honestly doesn't. But if you vote locally, it does, because you're talking about elections that can be won with 14 votes. That a single vote can mean the difference between who gets elected and who doesn't, what resolution gets passed and what doesn't. Unfortunately, the long election cycle means that people pay less and less attention because they feel like they're getting hammered with it all the time. And because people confuse national politics with local politics so that they feel like, oh, it doesn't matter if I vote. Well, that same booth that you're going to go into to vote for the president is going to have a lot of local issues on the ballot. And if you don't vote on those, it absolutely affects your life. And I feel like, sure, if you want to go and vote and pick, your city councilman, your district attorney, and all that stuff, and not vote for president, that's completely your right, but you should at least vote for the local stuff. Working as, a producer, I mean, I bought and sold movies for years, and I thought that alone, in the types of movies that I bought and sold, would be the type of thing that would not get me elected. I dealt in Asian exploitation films for years and horror movies and that type of stuff, and just waiting for somebody to say, oh, a 30-second spot that shows, some of the movies I released, and then my face smiling, and catching me with food in my teeth or something, and then running some slogan. And I think people see through that type of stuff, that's not really important. The things that are hard to beat as far as controversial subjects, things that can prevent you from attaining office, seem to be sex scandals because, and again, we're in California where there's less religion in politics. It's not absent, but there's less of it, so that the idea of a consenting adult having rights to their life and their choices is fine. But in other states, it's not so much. And so simple things get turned into very big deals and cloud the issues. One thing that disturbs me about Hillary Clinton is her stance on abortion. And that, you're hoping that a woman is going to be a very big women's rights politician, and she will say or do anything to get elected. But again, she's a much better bet than anybody on the other side. I mean, she seems like, the most liberal person on the planet next to someone like Ted Cruz, and even somebody like Donald Trump. It's, joking, talking seeing Susan Sarandon say that, at least with Trump, it'll start a revolution. And I think that that's true, that there are certain politicians that would cause an absolute bloody revolution. Ted Cruz being one of them, Donald Trump a possibility. So if you're looking for the status quo to stay the same, then Hillary Clinton's your girl, because nothing will change. She's a career politician. There's not a lot of difference between her policies and really anybody else's policies when it comes down to it. She's a war hawk, she ghosted into politics. It was based on her name, So I see that. And she's savvy, she's not incredibly likable, but she's savvy and she's smart. Obviously, she's intelligent. But can you believe what a politician says? You shouldn't. You have to judge by people's records, not what they say during an election cycle. And if you look at politicians' records, then, Bernie comes out, pretty much on top. But he's also an obstinate guy. What would his cabinet be like? There was a writer who wrote a book on Bernie Sanders, and they asked him that. It's like, who do you think would be in Bernie Sanders' cabinet? And he thought about it for like a beat, and he said, nobody. It's like Bernie's the type of guy that doesn't necessarily think he needs input from a lot of people, and that's not ideal in a president. You have to be able to get along with people. He has gotten along with people in the Senate. He's been very bipartisan. But I don't know what his presidency looks like. None of us do. And I mean, that's the thing. Look what our choices are. Our choices aren't good. It's great that someone like him can pick up traction, sort of man of the people, and he'll be allowed to get as far as he's allowed to get. And I don't think it's going to be to the Democratic nomination. So this notion that the government has to be run like a business has led to the privatization of prisons, the privatization of education, the privatization of a lot of things that have no business being run by private industry and are actually destructive to public society. The Founding Fathers didn't really want it to be a government of the people. They wanted them to have a voice, but then at a certain point, they vote for people who really vote. And we've seen that in elections. We certainly saw it in Florida with Al Gore, that people that were put into place by politicians and not voted for positions had enormous control over an election. And we've just seen it recently in, Arizona, during a primary. It was huge election fraud. And so election fraud is many different things. There are many different things that violate the rules of elections. And people freak out about things that almost never happen, which is that someone pretends to be somebody else and casts a vote. It happens so infrequently and is punishable by such a huge term of time and fines that being caught for it would be ridiculous. And yet that's the platform that the Republicans seem to be voting on in order to suppress the right for most people to be able to vote efficiently. And I have friends that will say, oh, but everybody has a license. It's like, you live in an area where you need a car, and a lot of people don't. And there's a lot of people who are older that never needed driver's licenses, who've never been to the DMV, and they don't understand that in a lot of places, the office window that you can go to get a state ID is open on the fourth Wednesday of every month, and sometimes there is no fourth Wednesday. And it just ensures that there's going to be indifference when it comes to an election, that people who have been in the military and fought for this country, people who have worked in other publicly funded and important jobs, firemen and policemen who are retired, who are of a certain age, can't vote. The idea that because you get sentenced to prison for a crime, that you all of a sudden now can't vote is kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's like you're either all in it together or you're not. And once you start making those divisions, it becomes dangerous. And that stuff does absolutely frustrate me, but it never turns on that light that says, and now I have to run for office. And I think that honestly, I would have more influence on politics as a successful businessman than I would as a politician, because who pays politicians?